we're going to do this in two parts. The basics. Um, this is sort of the tools, the techniques, the challenges that one faces with macro photography, special challenges, and how to meet those challenges. There's a lot crammed in here. My friend of mine is giving a macro class through the OLLI program at UVA, and he's covering this in 8 hours. Now he may be covering more, but this will be recorded, and there will be a PDF available of the slides. And as a special bonus, I will be giving you my email address. And as you work your way through some of these suggestions and tips, if you run into trouble, please feel free to email me. I basically love helping people with their photography issues, and macro is challenging. So please do feel free to email me with any questions you might have. The basics section is the longest part of this because there's a lot to it. And so if we get to 45 minutes from now, we haven't gotten to part two, don't panic because part two is a lot shorter. It's focused more on just how to approach the special cases of shooting active little creatures. But the basics are essential, and they have to be learned and understood before you're really going to make the progress that you hope to make. So let's see if there's anything else. And if you have a specific question, if you need some clarification on a point, feel free to interrupt. But if it's a more general question, you might want to wait till the end. May help things move along a little bit more. All right, let's go to the first thing. The obvious question may be, why shoot macro? For me, it's always been this. It's a new way of seeing. You seek out, you photograph small creatures, small wonders, reveal to yourself and others a whole new world that often goes unnoticed and unappreciated. To me, this is the greatest part of it. I spent my youth around these creatures and never thought much of them, really. I mean, they were interesting. They made funny noise, but until I got a macro lens on my camera and started shooting them and seeing their wonderful color and detail, I never fully appreciated them. And this is typical. One might find wonder in beautiful dogwood blossoms, but with a macro, you can help others at least see the details of the flowers and everything else. For instance, these are the true dogwood flowers right here. That's a flower, that's a flower, that's a flower. The rest of this is just for show. So these are the things you discover for yourself and discover for others as you start digging into this. This is the kind of shot that it maybe a typical tourist or even a regular photographer would take of a heliconia plant. Okay, but as a macro photographer, you will start seeing the photos within photos, zooming in and seeing the more interesting aspects. That was taken from this section right here. So far more interesting, far more intimate. Garden pests will never be the same. They will be beautiful little jewels. These aphids on a tulip petal. You can even see the little babies. How can you hate aphids? They're so sweet. And autumn leaves, you may have to rake them, but now you can look at them and see them as potential abstract art. So you can see that there are no limits on what you can discover for yourself and help other people discover. How many wildflower enthusiasts do we have here? Anybody? If you say yes, then you should know what this is, what wildflower this is.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a maple tree. It's a maple flower. Most people don't think of maple trees as having flowers. You see them turning red in the spring, as they are now here in Charlottesville. But these are the kinds of things you discover for yourself. Walking around, you'll see the most insignificant things, things that were insignificant to you for your whole life. Suddenly they become interesting and real. I'm sure many of you, judged from your background photos, have traveled around to wonderful places. They are full of wonders, but what's wonderful about macro is that any place practically can be a bountiful source of images. Backyards. It's just amazing what you can get right close to home. This shot, for example, this happened to entered this in an international photo contest years ago, and it won a major prize. Got a free trip to London for my wife and myself, a check, and all kinds of things spilled out from that. It was competing against things from all over the world. I took this in my backyard. And it has made more money. I sell photos very casually online over the years. Nothing really. I wouldn't quit my day job over if I had a day job. But it's a nice source of income. And this photo, this humble little photo of ants herding aphids, has earned me more money than any photo I've ever taken anywhere in the world. So if you have aspirations of then your backyard may be just as good a place as the savannas of Africa. Okay, macro, close up. What's the difference? Some people sort of make an issue of it. And there is kind of a distinction. Close up means getting your lens close enough to a subject to magnify it up to life size on your sensor. And macro is magnifying your subject to life size and beyond. It's a distinction, no big deal. And this magnification is often expressed as a ratio. Again, nothing important, but it is helpful to know what you're seeing when you read about these things. A 1:4 means the object is magnified to 1/4 its life size, its real size on your sensor. 1:2, half size, and these are the kinds of magnification you may be able to get with some lenses, with some accompaniment, with some accessories, but 1:1. Now that's true macro. The dime will fit right on your sensor, and then of course beyond that, 2:1, all the way up into a range where it becomes really a challenge. Anyway, so they're the ratios you may see once in a while, and I'll refer to them here once in a while. Okay, let's talk about the tools for magnifying. Basically, that's what we're doing, is we're magnifying the image. And the simplest and easiest and cheapest is a close-up lens. And you can use these on any lens at all, up to a certain size. I think they only come to sizes up to 77 millimeters or so. But these are basically magnifying glasses that you screw in the front of your lens, any lens. The pros are that they're easy to attach, just screw them on, like any kind of a front filter. They come in different powers or diopters, so you have a choice. There's no reduction in light, which is a big advantage. You'll see later on how important this is. And they're relatively inexpensive. You can buy them cheaper than $100, but then we'll see that's not a good option. The problem is they're limited in magnification. A +3 diopter gives only about a 1:4 ratio, as you just saw. Not much. It's better than nothing. Thing is, if you add more magnification, the image starts decreasing in quality because it's a very simple lens. And it can't do what the elements in a sophisticated lens can do. So your image does decline. If you do go this route, if you want to go this route to make any of your lenses focus a little closer and magnify the image, you need to get a good one. And that's up in the $100 range. Canon, I shoot Nikon, but Canon makes a very good one. 2 elements, multi-coated. And if you do buy one to fit your largest lens that you plan on using it on. And then by reduction rings to fit it to whatever lens you happen to be using. Another tool, extension tubes. These are very handy for magnifying. Again, you can use these with any lenses just about. And now they're fully automated. They connect completely to all the electronics in your lens, coordinate with the body of the camera. So everything's automatic, autofocus, everything else. The pros are you have a lot more magnification than a close-up lens. No added glass, so there's no loss of image quality. However, they do cut down on the light. At this point, they need to be placed behind the lens, so it's a little less convenient to use. But here's the bugaboo. They do reduce light. So if you're magnifying, if you put enough of these on your camera and mount a lens on it, and it's enough to give you a one-to-one magnification, true macro, you're really reducing a lot, 2 full stops of light. So anyway, here is the answer to all of your macro challenges, is to buy a macro lens specifically made for macro. How many of you actually, do any of you not have a macro lens? Okay, anyway, this is the way to go. They provide one-to-one magnification with no attachments. They're extremely sharp, and they're sharp from corner to corner, no aberration, very, very high quality, finely engineered lenses. They're available in various focal lengths, from anywhere from 40 millimeters up to 200, each with a different working distance. And that's an important concept, especially if you're going to be shooting living, moving creatures. The cons, the only one is that they can get expensive. You can buy a good 100 millimeter. I wouldn't recommend any lens shorter than 90 millimeters. I have a 90. Nikon and Canon both make really 2 very nice ones in the 105 range. You can spend more on a 180. The 200 millimeter, I think Nikon is the only one that has ever made that. I have one, but I don't think they make it anymore. It's very expensive. Anyway, don't buy anything less than a 90 millimeter because you just won't have working distance. Anyway, that's the only con. They are expensive. But if you're going to be shooting in your backyard rather than flying to Africa, it's going to be worth it. Okay, working distance. What are we talking about? This is really important. It's the distance between the subject you're shooting and the lens, the front of the lens at a maximum magnification, the minimum focus distance. And the longer the focal length, the greater the working distance. This is the, if I'm using my 90 millimeter, that's about as close as that's how close I will get to get 1-to-1 magnification. So if you're shooting a skittish animal or something, that's pretty close. 200 millimeter, that's more than double the distance. That's far more acceptable if you're shooting a skittish subject. And that's one of the reasons it's important. One reason for a longer working distance is that you can get the shot when you can't get closer. If I had my 90 millimeter lens on rather than my 200 millimeter to shoot this allium, I'd be standing right in a tulip bed, wouldn't go over very well. So again, 200 millimeters gives you that working distance. The big factor is that it avoids disturbing your subject. Dragonflies, for example, are very skittish. And the only way you're going to get a shot like this is with a longer focal length, and still with a lot of luck. So working distance is important. Another big issue I found is to avoid confrontations. I ran into this little guy on a trail in Panama one afternoon, walking by myself. Luckily, I saw him before I stepped on him. This happens to be a fer-de-lance, the most venomous snake in all of tropical America. My first thought was, man, I got to get closer for a better shot. So I did. I went around the other side and captured this photo. I think it was asleep, so that was one advantage. But still, you don't want to get close to these features. So a little pop quiz on working distance. Which lens do you think I used? My 90mm or my 200mm?
200.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. So yeah, those are the times you really, really want your 200mm lens or something fairly long. Okay, those are some of the tools that enable you to focus closer and thereby magnify it. That creates some challenges. It's just a matter of physics. And these are the challenges that you want to be able to meet. You want to have control over your camera, anticipate what the problems are going to be, and then be able to actually meet these challenges. Come on here. Okay, challenge number one, less depth of field. Most of you probably know what depth of field is. I do these presentations assuming that there are some people in the audience who don't know the basics. And there are more and more of those people these days, because back when we used manual cameras, we had to know things about aperture and shutter speed and all of that. Now people can get away with, practically, given the sophistication of cameras these days, can get away with shooting on auto or program and really not fully understand what they're doing. We have people who've been in our club for years and still don't take the leap into really understanding this. For macro, you really have to, because it's a lot of critical factors that you have to master, and you're not going to be able to master without understanding the basics. And depth of field is one of them. For those of you who necessarily don't know it, that's the depth of focus. How much of the subject is in focus when you're focusing on it. This shot of raindrops on a peacock feather, that's shallow depth of field, very, very shallow. And when you're shooting 1-to-1, you can get down to a depth of field of maybe 1 millimeter. So it's very shallow. That's with great depth of field. Sometimes you want shallow depth of field. If you're shooting flowers or something soft and ethereal, you may want only just a tiny bit of the photo in sharp focus. If that's the case, if you really get into this aspect, it's a beautiful way to do macro, you're going to have it a lot easier than the rest of us. But almost everyone wants to shoot with maximum depth of field on occasion anyway. So that's what you see on something like this, where everything is in focus from the very, very front all the way back. And that takes some doing. Okay, how do we manage depth of field? You probably know this. If so, please bear with me. It's the best way to, depth of field varies with the focal length of your lens, but how you control it is with the aperture of your lens. I found that some people don't even think about their lens having an aperture. Because they no longer see that diaphragm closing inside the lens when they're fooling around with it, because it stays open all the time, except when you're shooting, when you click the shutter. And so they don't even know what an aperture is. The aperture, basically, it's the size of the opening in the lens diaphragm when you take the picture. And that's what creates depth of field. The smaller the aperture, the greater the depth of field. This was a shot of a row of strawberries. I took this with wide open lens, very large aperture, and just closed down the aperture and took the shot again, and you can see the difference. One was wide open at 2.8, the other was at f16. Big difference. Okay, aperture size, you probably know this. It's expressed as a fraction. f/4, f/16, whatever. It's often listed simply as f4, which results in a lot of confusion. People say, well, why do the smaller numbers signify a larger aperture? Well, they're not really smaller numbers because it's a fraction. f4 is a much bigger number than f16. So anyway, this is what they look like. And you adjust it with your aperture priority or manual settings. And that's, since depth of field is so crucial, is so limited, and therefore it's so important for you to maximize the depth of field with the aperture. You really have to take control and set the aperture so you know what you're getting. And if you have a depth of field preview button on your camera, you have a big advantage where you can press that button, and what it does is closes the aperture down to what it's going to be when you fire the shutter, so you can see actually through the lens or on live view, if your live view works with that, what the depth of field is going to be. That's very helpful. Okay, and for macro, if you want the kind of depth of field that you really want to expect most of the time, f11 and f16 generally are adequate. You'll never be happy with the amount of depth of field. That's just the way it is in macro. You always wish for more. And you can get more if you crank it up, say f22 or beyond even. Mine will crank up, I think, f45. You probably don't want to do that because beyond f16, you're trying to squeeze too much light through too small a hole. And that causes something called diffraction, which actually degrades, rather significantly degrades the quality, the sharpness of your image. So at the end, I have some tricks for you to use that will allow you to stick with f11, f16 as your maximum, your smallest apertures, and you get by. You won't have to go. You can test your lenses, see how it shoots at f22, if the diffraction isn't too bad, or if it's noticeable and you can correct it with sharpening. That's fine. It's up to you, but it can be a factor. Okay, that small aperture that you're going for, because you are trying to maximize your depth of field, causes some major challenges. And the biggest challenge is it lets in less light. That's the only way your sensor can get any light is through the lens. And the size of the aperture, obviously, is what allows the light to come through. Large aperture, lots of light. Small aperture, less light. If you get less light in through the lens, the shutter is going to have to stay open longer to compensate. All right, that means it's what's called a slower shutter speed. So here's a graph. We're not going to get into it too deeply now, but it's really a handy way of, this is one of the better ones I've found online. It just shows the the relationship between aperture size and shutter speeds. As you see, with a wide open aperture, lots of light coming in, you can get by with very fast shutter speed. You close it down and you've got to compensate for that loss of light by having a much slower shutter speed. That's just very simple stuff, but that creates an issue. In compensating for a lack of depth of field, you're compromising on shutter speed, and that creates some issues. What you're doing with a macro, same thing you're doing with a long telephoto, you're magnifying the image. And if you ever used a long telephoto, you'll know when you magnify the image, you're magnifying the motion of both the camera if you're hand holding and if the subject's moving. That will be much more dramatic. And what happens if you have a moving subject and a slower shutter speed? Not a good combination at all. So here you can start seeing the issues here of pushing to the extreme, both with shooting with a long telephoto and shooting macro are the two most challenging forms of photography that I am aware of, that I've ever done, because of these compromises you have to make because of the physics involved. So the solution to this particular problem is control the motion. Okay, how do you do that? One way is to steady the camera. Hand holding is an issue always. No one can hold a camera steady enough under some circumstances. You may have vibration resistance or image stabilization. That's a big bonus, but it may not be enough. You'll need a tripod. I hate to say that. A lot of people in my club anyway hate the idea of tripods. They just deny that they'll ever need a tripod. For macro, if you want to do anything serious, you're going to need a tripod. But this isn't a tripod. It's a toy. This is a tripod. If you're going to buy it, if you don't have a tripod, or if you're considering upgrading after we go through this, buy one that's good for all of your photography, because I'm an advocate of using one whenever possible, because it really does not only make for sharper photos, but it really helps you compose an image. Not going to get into that, it's a whole other subject. But anyway, yeah, you should buy as large a tripod as you can comfortably carry. Larger is heavier, so carbon fiber is lighter. If you really can't carry any weight at all, then you'll just have to settle for something smaller. But believe me, they really are. The larger ones are much sturdier and much more solid, and much more massive. They give you that much more solid foundation. They should come to eye level when fully extended, for not for macro necessarily. It's hardly shooting anything at macro at that height, but for other photography, if you're going to spend good money on a good tripod, it should come to eye level, and it should have a real good sturdy ball head. The ball head is this little attachment right here that makes it much easier. Okay, for macro though, even though you want a tripod that can go high, you want it very often want to go low, because that's down close to the ground is where a lot of the most interesting things happen to be. So when you're buying a tripod or thinking about upgrading, you should try one where the legs come out absolutely parallel to the ground, all the way down. The camera still sits up a bit, as you can see here, but you're getting low, and that's where you want to go. If you buy one with a center column, it should have one that can attach in this manner here. In fact, this is really an ideal way of ideal tripod for macro, because you can use this arm here to move this camera real close to the ground. And you go even lower. I have an L bracket. This shows L bracket in use. If I weren't using my L bracket, if I wanted a horizontal orientation of the camera, the camera would be up here. Oops, sorry, would be up here. With an L bracket, you can mount this way, so it's even much lower. And this is what they look like in the raw. Very handy for all kinds of, because what they're great at is it's not just for macro, not for just for getting low in macro, but when you're shooting landscapes or whatever, if you decide to change from a horizontal orientation to vertical, all you have to do is loosen it, turn it around, plop it down, and your composition basically stays the same. Very handy. Thing is, they do come specifically for your model of camera, because they have to be engineered for all the little openings on various sides of the camera. But so you'll make sure you get one that fits your particular model. Okay, another way to go low is with a beanbag and a right angle viewer. That's what this is here. This is the right angle viewer. Here's your beanbag. Very low. It's not as steady as being mounted on a tripod with an L bracket, but it works. Or if you have an articulating LCD screen, that's ideal. I don't, but my next camera will. So why go low? Why is it so important? I already mentioned that's where a lot of the things are. They're down near the ground. This is the kind of shot you'd take of a box turtle if you were just shooting a nice shot of a box turtle. But if you're really into macro and you want to get a more dramatic, more interesting perspective, this is the shot you'll go for. And the only way you're going to get a shot like that is with the camera right on the ground. Jumping spider looking up at me. Well, I wanted to get closer and more in his world, its world. So get down low on the ground. So you do need to go low. Getting up again, it could be a problem for some of us, but you manage. If you have a tripod, you can always use that as a prop. Anyway, now you got all right, so you got a tripod, you got a steady camera. Now what? That's only half the problem, half the solution, because the other half is that you need a steady subject. And that means you do have to deal with the wind and since you're magnifying your subject, you're magnifying the wind. The slightest breeze becomes a hurricane. And so there are ways of dealing with it. One is to use what's called a clamp. It's a commercially made clamp that you clamp onto your subject to slow down the effects of the wind somewhat. They work pretty well. They're not strong wind. They don't do much, but it helps. You can make your own. Just out of some stiff wire and a couple of clamps. It works. It helps. But persistence is really going to be important. You basically have to set up, and that's why another thing why a tripod is important. You can set up. You know where the focus point is. You sit there and you wait. And you want to use a remote shutter release, because if you're waiting patiently for a calm moment when the wind isn't blowing and you jump on the shutter with your thumb, you're going to probably move the camera even if it is on a tripod. So you want a remote shutter release, and you wait and you have patience. And as soon as that wind stops just for a second, you get your shot. Maybe. Sometimes you don't. And if you get into this state, which will happen, it's time to go home. You're not going to get the shot. So anyway, they always have to be willing to compromise and live with reality. Okay, that's a lot of stuff to digest all at once. I say you'll have this later to look at, but this is a pretty good summary of what we've talked about. You're magnifying. Shooting macro is basically magnifying your lens. Requires a lens close to the subject, which is what the macro lenses do and all the attachments, which means less depth of field, which means a small aperture to compensate for that. And of course, you're letting less light in, and that demands a slower shutter speed, which is going to be a problem with motion blur. So you have to use a tripod or a strobe, we'll get to that in a second, to stop the motion exacerbated by the magnification. So here's another solution for dealing with movement. You freeze it with a strobe. You can stop all motion, both the camera and the subject. So if you are hand holding, strobe is the only way to go. Again, there may be exceptions, but there aren't many. A strobe, even at its minimum speed, be about 1,000th of a second of a real blast of light. So basically, it so overwhelms the ambient light that shutter speed becomes unimportant. And as you know now, if you can make shutter speed unimportant, you're way ahead of the game as far as compensating for less depth of field with a small aperture. And it basically is the only solution, maybe the only solution, with active subjects and significant wind. All right. Okay, shooting with strobe. Now, some cameras, Nikon has very often mounts a small flash on top of their cameras, even the good quality cameras. But these are not adequate at all for macro, because very often your subject will be right here in front of the lens, and this flash shoots straight out. And it's not a powerful flash anyway. A little bit of a reflector can help. And if you have a larger flash, a taller, more powerful flash that fits in your flash shoe here, that's a better deal, but it's still not going to be a very good solution. The solution is an off-camera strobe. You can buy brackets for these things. You can hand hold a flash to the side and aim it at your subject. That's really the whole point of this, is it comes off the camera, it aims at the subject. Of course, it's closer to the subject, there's more light available also, so it's going to be even a smaller speed, a faster speed. The other good thing about off-camera is that it provides side lighting, which is far more interesting than front lighting. It brings out much more detail, much more texture. So Off-camera strobe is what you want. You can buy brackets that handle these things. Um, this was my setup when I was back in the days when I was shooting a lot of insects. This is quite a setup. It's that massive 200 millimeter Nikon macro lens, two very powerful flashes, wired to the hot shoe. And I put diffusers on them. Flashes tend to create light that's equivalent to sunshine, bright, hard light. Sometimes that's fine. Sometimes it works just perfectly. But very often you want a little softer light. So I cut these out of a milk carton. You can buy these things. But if you have a milk carton, cut them out and attach them with Velcro, and they work great. Anyway, that softens the light. Two flashes give you more balanced light. You can set one to be a slightly less powerful than the other one, so you do get some shadows, do get some texture. Work great. And I already mentioned this. The problem is that it's a massive thing to carry. That was really, really heavy and cumbersome, especially with all the wires attached. It worked great, but it was a bear. This was my first digital camera. Bought it about 15 years ago, I guess now. The reason I went for it right away is that it had this attachment, these two smaller flashes that fit on the front and worked remotely off of the built-in flash. Really great. Now, they're not as powerful as the big, powerful lenses or flashes, so they don't stop action as much as the other ones did, but they work great, and it's really a lot lighter, a lot handier. Strobe is really, or it does things you can't get without them. One of which is that it stops the fastest movement. You couldn't get a shot of this beetle taking off of this leaf without strobe. You get at least blurring wings and probably a lot more blur. Just not possible. And it brings out things you don't expect sometimes. Not only does it bring out great texture, which I already mentioned, but when I shot this horsefly, I didn't see this iridescence. I just saw some faint lines, and I thought, oh, well, it's horsefly, I'll get a shot. This is back in the day of film, and when I pulled the film out of the box, I was flabbergasted at the beautiful iridescence that the flash brought out. And it can bring out the details and vibrance of the subject. Nothing else can. Okay, that's the strobes. Highly recommended, especially if you're going to be shooting insects or other moving things. Okay, challenge number one was lack of depth of field inherent in moving your camera close. Challenge number two is the slow shutter speed that results from that and how you deal with that. Challenge number three is focusing. Since you have sometimes a millimeter of depth to work with, getting focused is quite a challenge. There has to be precise. There's really no room for error. And people who are used to shooting autofocus, very often run into problems because they're used to not being as careful as they might be with their focus, because the cameras do, especially very modern cameras, do amazing things with autofocus. If you're going to use autofocus for macro, and since the depth of field is so shallow, even with a small aperture, you're going to have to be right on the right part of the subject. And I use manual all the time. But if you want to use autofocus, then you can. But you have to make sure that you use just, very often with autofocus, you'll see lots of these little focus points. And very often a camera will pick one for you. It'll turn red or something to show you which one it's using, or more than one. To use autofocus effectively for a macro, you have to learn how to use just one. And then you have to make sure you put that exactly on the part of the subject that you want to be absolutely the sharpest. In this case, the woman's eye, not her mouth. So if you want to use autofocus, you have to know how to use it, or you're going to really be frustrated with macro, because the tolerances are so small. I use manual all the time because I have pretty good vision. Um, and I can see through your viewfinder perfectly well. A lot of people can't struggle with that, but that's okay now because now we have live view, and you can set up your camera or hold your camera and turn on live view. You can even magnify the screen and focus with that. It'll just move in and out until it's sharp, and then bingo, you got it. So that's one way to use manual. And you, again, you have a little more control because you don't have to keep an eye on that little focus point. You know exactly what you want focused, and you can see it real time. Now you could, since the focus is very shallow, even with a small aperture, you have to deal with it. You have to sort of accommodate it in some ways. And one of the ways is to align the subject, the plane of the subjects. It's a little nymphal Katie did. This is pretty heavily magnified. I think it's 1:1. Very tiny little guy. To get the depth of field I wanted, I lined my up perfectly parallel. The back of the camera, the sensor, is exactly parallel with the body plane. That means that you can get the whole body in, even if the depth of field is very shallow, which it is in this case. See, I couldn't get both legs in, even at f/16. But by focusing this way, I got the whole body in. I didn't even get the other antenna in. I had to take this antenna here, duplicate it in Photoshop, and put it in here because the other one was blurred and gone. Anyway, that's one way to get ahead of it. It works. Most of the time it works really well. You'll see plenty of opportunities where you can line the camera up with the plane of the subject, and it's perfectly fine. But a lot of times you aren't going to be shooting that way. You don't want that perspective. So you have to decide what part of the photo is absolutely essential. And if you're shooting head on or shooting any photo, it's always the eyes. If it's a creature, it's always the eyes. And you'll notice from this one, I probably shot, this is a very small frog. I shot this one closed down to f/16, but you'll notice the eyes are tacked sharp, but the tip of the nose, the eyes are sharp, tip of the nose is a little soft. That's okay, because if the eyes are sharp, you probably have captured what you needed to capture. People don't worry about if the nose is sharp. Ideal if it is, but if not, no problem. Same thing with a creature like this. This was a challenge. This little centipede was moving toward me very rapidly, and I had to make sure that I nailed it right across here because you see how fast it fades out. Again, you have to be very quick and very ready to get what you want. And you have to know exactly what part of the photo you want in focus. Okay, a couple tips for focusing. One of it's if you are hand holding, and notice I'm hand holding with that contraption I showed you earlier, two huge flashes and a huge macro lens. You sort of have to settle in, and the first step is to crank your lens out to whatever framing you want. You know you want it that large. Then you sort of settle down and relax, get situated, get comfortable, and then sort of just move the camera back and forth just the slightest bit. And then when you have the perfect focus, you hit the shutter. Get comfortable, don't try to rush it, make it as easy as possible. And sometimes I was just shooting something the other day, and I've got 50 years experience doing this, and I have all the right equipment. I still get only 1 out of 10 sharp, perfectly sharp photos where the sharpness is exactly where I want it. So shoot away, shoot on continuous burst mode if you have it. If you have a flash that can accommodate that, that's ideal. But don't be frustrated if you have to take a lot of shots. In the days of film, that became expensive, but you had to do it. Okay, basically,
Gerry,
that's, yeah.
if you're shooting some subject that's not moving, do you do any focus stacking?
Ah, We're going to get to that.
Okay.
Focus stacking comes next, very, very soon. Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, that's the technical part. That's the tools, the techniques, the challenges, and how you deal with them. That's the hard stuff. Now we can sort of coast a little bit here. I have to talk about aesthetics here because it's getting a good macro shot isn't just about sharpness or depth of field. And I see this to my great frustration in my own camera club. We have a peer review, what we call photo review sessions once a month, which I think you guys might be trying, going to be trying, where people bring their photos in and show them, and or they upload them and we show them and we critique them. And one of the biggest problems, if not the biggest problem, is background. People just aren't, they're focusing, I call it mind your backgrounds. People are so focused on the subject that, again, quality of background is just as important in macro as it is in anything else. Even people with some experience are so focused on the subject that they forget that there's a background there. The background is just as important as the subject. I'm talking to Alan Shirtliff, who's a photographer for the local newspaper, and he said what he's doing as shot for the paper, he glances at the subject, but his focus is, his eyes are on the background, and he's moving around one side or another, getting the subject to move around to get the background right. Then he focuses for a second and concentrates for a second on the subject and takes his shot. Most people shoot the opposite. And it happens especially in macro because there are so many things to keep in mind. Depth of field, shutter speed, focus is so critical that you get so wrapped up in getting the subject right that it's very easy to forget about the background. The background is just as important as the subject in macro as in everything else. So you really need to concentrate. And it doesn't help to have a spider monkey on your back shouting instructions in your ear. Sorry, I had to put this in. Anyway, you need to focus. Okay, a busy background equals a distracting background. This shot of a painted lady butterfly, perfectly sharp, perfectly good depth of field all the way through. But a terrible photo in my mind, or not a mediocre photo because of the background. Too much going on. We have now a very bright area up here, which is going to pull your eye right off the subject into the background where you don't want it. You have these lines coming across here, terribly distracting. If you can get a shot this good when you're just learning, that's great. But you'll want to do better eventually by basically, in this case, I just moved to a new location. I just moved slightly. In fact, I moved to a different flower. The butterfly came along, perfect background. No distraction. Your eye stays on the butterfly, appreciates the subject. So moving around helps. Grooming your subject. This can happen when your subject is not moving around. You really have to pay close attention. Even now with Photoshop, you can take out things that don't belong, and it's wonderful to do that because you can't always do a perfect job of grooming your background. But on this shot of these mouse-eared hawkweed flowers, the obvious thing to take out is this bottle cap here. And most people would go ahead and shoot, but it takes a little bit extra concentration to remove other things that might distract, like this stick back here, to get the shot without distractions. Now, again, this could be removed with Photoshop. In fact, I probably did that. I don't know, I can't remember. But what I do is in our zeal, when we see a great subject, we just want to get down there and shoot the damn thing. And we get excited, we get everything lined up. And that's how you forget your background, for one thing. But very often you forget that things are in the subject, in the frame that shouldn't be there. So go ahead, take a couple shots, get it out of your system, and then slow down, take a deep breath and say, okay, what's here that I can deal with that makes it a little bit better? And then you can pick things out and get rid of them. I carry a little kit with Velcro and orchid clips and clothespins and alligator clips, epoxy to wire, a little brush for brushing dirt away, twist ties, floss for string, scissors for clipping things out of the way. This is really handy stuff because very often you'll need to clear things away, and it's worth it. Believe me, it's worth doing it. Another big bugaboo in backgrounds. I see this all the time in our members' photographs. If the background is too bright, it's not going to work. And especially if the background is brighter than the subject. If that's the case, you will not get a decent photograph. It's just almost, there aren't many absolute rules in photography. This one comes pretty close. If the background is brighter than the subject, red flag should go up immediately. That's the shot. I took this as a demonstration shot. That's the shot some people would have taken and said, well, I got the crocuses sharp. That's a nice shot. Well, the background is too bright. So what I had to do in this case, I went in and removed the leaves back here that were causing those bright reflections. And then I stood in a position, the camera was on a tripod, I had a remote release, and stood and shaded the background. Now, I don't have to tell you which is the best shot, by far. So it's something you really need to do. Another way to deal with backgrounds, if the background is noisy or busy and you can't deal with it any other way, this is the case with this katydid I took in Ecuador, I think. I just picked up a leaf off the ground. I think I was using hand holding with a flash. I picked up a leaf and held it behind the katydid and blocked out that noisy, terrible, distracting background. And you could do that with just about anything. But you can also make your own backgrounds. Sometimes you get in a situation where you have something that, obviously in this case, if I were shooting an insect on this leaf here, this fence, there's no way I could soften that background by using a shallow depth of field. So you can make these little backgrounds for yourself. What I do, these work just amazingly well. Take your camera, throw it way out of focus. You open up the aperture to get the less depth of field, a little depth of field as possible, and just go around, start shooting stuff, sky, plants, all kinds of things. And then you can go in and print them out on matte paper, not even, satin won't do it. It has to be matte paper because you don't want any glare or reflections. You can make them in various sizes, 8 by 10. You can carry those with you into the field. Since I shoot most of my stuff in a studio, I make mine in 13 by 19 on matte paper, and they just are wonderful for backgrounds. And they really, really do the job. This shot I took with a natural background. This was the actual background there. I just made sure it was far enough away. It was far enough away to get nice and soft. This shot I took with a background in front of a fence, a wire fence. And I defy anyone to see that that's a piece of paper with ink on it. Everyone see the katydid here, the lichen mimic katydid. Here's the abdomen, thorax, head, front legs, side legs, and rear legs. Amazing creature. Took that in Panama. Anyway, backgrounds, essential to your photography. Someone asked about focus stacking. It is a great way to go. How many of you know about focus stacking? Say if you don't. Okay, good. You guys are well educated, I swear. Okay, if you're shooting something you're shooting with a small aperture to get maximum depth of field in your subject, that can also make the background more distracting by giving it too much focus. This is a typical example. I set my aperture, I think, at f16. Oops. I disconnected my screen. Hang on a second. Oh, hang on, folks. My wire came undone. There we are. We're back again. I kicked my wire. Sorry. All right. Back to sharing screen. Oh, damn. Sorry, folks. You're not seeing it, are you?
No.
No. Okay. Okay. I'm using a second screen and my HDMI cord is wearing a little thin. Hang on. Okay. I think we got it now. All right. Let me slideshow from current slide. Do you have it? Do you have it now?
No, it's just see you.
Okay. Okay. Then I have to do screen share again. Okay. Let me go back in here. Come here. Here we go. Share screen. Not there. Where'd it go? Okay, hang on. Keep our cool here. Let's see. Let me see if I can.
Is that
Well,
application closed?
I'm sorry.
Is your application closed?
I don't know. I have what I have is slideshow from current. Here we go. You should see it now, but you don't.
No.
Okay. Okay. Share.
There we go.
Okay. Excellent. Now I have to get my screen. Now if I can get what I need to see. Okay. Still good?
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. All right. Back to this one. I'm gonna have to definitely have to get a better. I think it's the monitor. The socket is worn out. Okay. To get this shot, I had to use F16 to get everything in from this bud all the way back to this bud, right? I needed that much depth of field. But in the process, because of F16, this background was close enough that too much detail, too distracting. So I used focus stacking. What I did was I changed the aperture to about, I think F8, something like that. I was able to test it through my depth of field preview button. I set it at F8, tested it at the background. When the background was sufficiently soft, then I was able to take a series of shots, focusing first here in the front, then in the middle level, back farther, and back to here, and then back to this point here. And then, so I had a series of 5 or 6 photos, each with a part of this in focus, and I ran it through the focus stacking software. I use Helicon Focus, and ended up with this. Same, everything's sharp back to here, and now the background. I think the sun went in, which was good too, because the brighter background's not helpful. But anyway, that's the thing with focus stacking. We can't go into it here, of course, but we have a focus stacking genius in our membership, and he created a presentation, recorded a presentation that is, I think, well, maybe it's just a slideshow. Anyway, it's available on our website. So if you go to the Charlottesville Camera Club website, on the left-hand column, there's a place for presentations. You pull up all the presentations we've done in the past, and you'll find his on focus stacking. He really knows his stuff. And if you want to know more about focus stacking, he's the guy to go to. Anyway, one word. Okay, part 2. Well, we're a little past our time, but anyway, that's time to go hunting. Now that you know your stuff, you've practiced, you're ready to go, you're going to go out and find some real active subjects. First advice may be obvious, but you got to find good habitat. I found that areas with water, near water, next to water, is great habitat for all kinds of creatures, vertebrates, invertebrates, all kinds. So seek out the best places. Another great place, wildflower meadows. Amazing places. You're going to see a lot of insects there. But better yet, this has worked out well for me over the years. Create your own habitat. This is our backyard. This used to be, not too many years ago, nothing but lawn, monoculture grass. So we slowly decided to replace it. And now we have, I would say I shoot probably 80% of my photograph now in my own backyard. It's not so hard to do. You don't have to go to the extent that we did. Putting in a pond was great, but you don't have to go that far. Just a few areas with lots of flowers, lots of good hiding places for insects, and you don't have to go to any place exotic at all. Okay, when you're out hunting, you have a lot of choices. Going when the light is right is one obvious choice. The golden hour is just as it's excellent for normal photography. It's also great for macro because you get that nice, warm, beautiful light. Early morning, late in the afternoon. In the morning, insects will be very quiet. They're just warming up from a cooler evening, and or they like this bumblebee, sleeping, recovering from being drenched by the rain during the night. They're very quiet, very little wind, which is great. Problem is, in the summertime, you probably have to get up at 5 a.m. to get there, but anyway, so it's a good time to go. And there may be a bonus. Great stuff for macro photography. Really brings your photos alive. But midday is great too for other reasons. The wind may pick up a bit. The light's not quite as good, but you're going to find a lot more active wildlife, a lot more active behavior, a lot of predation. For example, this is a wheel bug. It's just captured a bumblebee. You can see the proboscis sticking down into the bumblebee, sucking out its insides. Isn't nature lovely? Anyway, predatory stink bugs doing the same dirty deed to a bumblebee. These are the kind of things you're going to find later in the day. Crab spiders just caught a butterfly on that, nectaring on that flower behind it. Catch creatures mating that time of day, or catch them mating and eating at the same time. I'm assuming this is the male, it's usually smaller. And of course, only a male would think of having dinner while mating. So, that's the way it is. All right, capturing the right moment. Perfectly good shot of a tropical weevil. Notice I took it, plane of the weevil is the same plane as the camera, put a false background back there. Perfectly decent shot, but with beetles especially. They're great for, if you have the patience to wait for them to crawl. What they very often do is they'll crawl to the edge of something, and then they'll lift their outer wings, these hard elytra here. They'll lift those up out of the way, and then the inner wings will take off. That gives you time to be ready to snap, because they have to go through this process. And this is the kind of thing you end up with then. Just taking off, and much more interesting action shot. So highly recommend it. Another tip, get to know your subjects. I came across this black swallowtail caterpillar feeding on some fennel, and as I approached closely with the lens, you could see it rearing up, sort of beginning as a defensive mode. Well, I knew enough about these guys that I could so I got the shot while I could get it, but then I knew that this could get better. So I took a pencil I had in my pocket and tapped him right on the head, just lightly, and this is what I got. It shoots out these two horns and regurgitates this offensive spit here, and that's the shot I wanted. And by knowing that this is what they do, it really makes for. But this will come as you get out there and do more shooting. Okay, getting close enough. That requires stalking your prey. This is requires walking slowly, try to avoid casting a shadow because that can spook something before you spook it otherwise. I would gladly, if we're live, I'd gladly demonstrate a good stalking technique, but this guy does a great job. Found this on the web, and he demonstrates very well how he stalks insects. Here's the website if you want. So I would recommend it. Don't follow his habit here of trying to handhold without a strobe. I checked some of his photos. He knows how to do it, but his photos are very shallow depth of field, too shallow in my mind, because he can't shoot at a fast enough. He can't use a small enough aperture to get more depth of field because he can't shoot with a fast enough shutter speed. So if he had a strobe, he wouldn't have that problem. But anyway, good demonstration. A lot of other good techniques and tips he provides about approaching these subjects. One of the best, oh yeah, that's one of the things he does is just moving slowly, carefully, deliberately. I've gone out with groups of people and some of us crash around into it, just spoil it for everybody. Just be very careful and quiet, and you'll get the shot more often than you otherwise. One of the techniques I use constantly is you take a shot, you get as close as you think you can safely without disturbing the subject, and you take a shot. This was a toad that came to our backyard pond. And this is about as close as I had my long telephoto macro on. I got this shot. I knew that if it jumped in the water at that point, I could still deal with it. I'd still have a photo. But then I moved a little closer, got another shot, and moved a little closer still. And I got to the point where I had enough magnification, and I got the shot. Now, it jumped into the water right after that, which was fine. But I got the photo by being very deliberate and taking the shots as I got them, just as backup. Anyway, so I did disturb the toad, jumped into the pond, ruined its nice area where it was waiting for dinner, I guess, or just at least basking in the sun. So that brings up the last topic, ethics. You're dealing with living things when you're out in the wild. So the question is, how should we treat other species? Can we treat insects less carefully than vertebrates, frogs and snakes and things? Can we treat vertebrates, cold-blooded vertebrates, less carefully than we treat rabbits? I mean, this is how people are. They have their favorite kinds of creatures. I take a lot of shots like this. I found this little baby toad in our pond, took it into my studio, put it on my thumb, and took a shot. Now, of course, I carefully took it back unharmed. But what if it had hopped off my thumb and got lost in the studio? I would have ended up killing it, basically. Not a good thing. So, what about manhandling a mantis? I grabbed this mantis and decided to try a different kind of a shot. The mantis didn't like that at all, and very upset over it. I just, bothered him and made it difficult. Is that ethical? Probably. I let him go unharmed, but could have damaged it when I grabbed it. So these are the things you have to ask yourself. This shot is especially one of the things that comes up with the macro photographers. One way to get into a good fight with other macro photographers is to ask them whether they refrigerate their specimens, their subjects before they photograph them, especially with cold-blooded creatures only. Some people think that is absolutely a carnal sin. Others, like myself, feel that if you know what you're doing and you're careful, it is not so bad. I had an assignment to shoot the center spread of National Wildlife Magazine. They wanted a shot of an insect's head, and I knew exactly what I wanted, but I knew that these European hornets are very, very feisty. They don't like to be dealt with. So I netted it, put it in a jar, put it in my refrigerator, and knowing that these creatures normally would cool down at night and become calm, so I knew it wasn't a big problem. And while it was cooling down, I made a little harness out of black cardboard to put around its waist, so I could hold it in front of the lens and then I brought it out of the refrigerator. It was quiet, wasn't going to sting me or fly away. Put the harness on, held it up, and let it warm up to come back to full activity. Recovered very quickly, and I was able to get the shot. I would not have gotten the shot otherwise. So for me, it was ethical to do that. Other people may disagree, and if you leave it, of course, if I left it in there too long, it would have killed it. So again, these are rules that you really have to decide whether it's what's right and what's wrong. Of course, also while you're out shooting, always obey the rules. Don't crush the wildflowers. I do it myself. Sometimes I forget, and I hate myself for it. But these are things that you just try to be a good citizen and be mindful of all your fellow creatures. So that's the show, basically. But I do want to update very quickly. This will be very brief. We didn't talk about ISO settings. To compensate for slow shutter speed, if you set the aperture you would need to get the right depth of field, and notice the shutter speed is too slow. Say you're hand holding, or even the wind's blowing or something's moving, you can crank up the ISO and the shutter speed will increase in speed right along with it. What all ISO does is it just turns up the volume of the amount of light that's hitting your sensor. The problem with that has been that, here's an example. F16, ISO 200, you have 1/8 of a second. Subject is blurred if moving, need a tripod or a strobe. At F16, your ISO 6400, you have 1/250th of a second. Subject is sharp, no strobe necessary, no tripod necessary. But up to now, high ISO meant a lot of noise in your photos. That's been changing very rapidly. New cameras are amazing in how little noise there can be in very high ISO settings. Those of you who were talking earlier about the new mirrorless cameras, they can be pretty amazing. And there's even software now that's really good at getting rid of noise. So if you have an older camera and you have to shoot at high ISO to get the shot and there's too much noise, you can get rid of it. Topaz Labs makes a great denoise software. Anyway, just to show you the results, a friend of mine has a new Canon, I guess R6, new mirrorless. And he took, this is just an example of a little sculpture. He's not a real photographer, but he has a nice camera. He shot this at F16. I mean, he's learning macro. He's getting there. F16, ISO 1600. Now for my camera, which is about 8 years old now, that's high. But for this camera, it's nothing. ISO 1600 but setting it there without f-stop 1/6 of a second. So he had to use a tripod or it would have been blurred, right? Here's the next shot he took. F16, same aperture, same depth of field, ISO 25,600. Unbelievable. This gave him a shutter speed of 100th of a second, which meant he was able to hand hold it. And yeah, if you blow this one up, oops, sorry. If you blow this one up, you will see more noise than there is over here, but it's noise you can live with, believe it or not, even at 25,000. And if you want a little bit less, you could use a good software to get rid of it. As I mentioned, Topaz Labs denoise. It's fantastic. I have no stake in Topaz Labs at all. They don't pay me or anything, but their stuff is really at the cutting edge. Okay, another option. If you magnify, the more you magnify, the more you're getting into those critical areas where everything is just very critical. If you don't have to magnify as much, if you can shoot at say 1.2, I mean, the ratio of 1:2 rather than 1:1, you're going to have a lot fewer problems with depth of field, shutter speed, and everything else. So if you shoot at less magnification, you can then enlarge the photo to the size you originally wanted. Now, up to this point, this was the problem because the software wasn't all that great. If you try to blow it up too much, Photoshop, for example, has some good programs, but it's but you can't go too far with it. Again, Topaz at the leading edge. Their Topaz Gigapixel AI is truly amazing. Doesn't work every time, but you can shoot something like that first little toad picture I saw it at a far distance. I could have taken that one and blown it up to the final size that I got with Gigapixel, and there wouldn't have been any deterioration of the quality. Something to know. It's not. It's like I think they usually on sale for about $80. Really great, and also if you any kind of photography, if you have to crop in, just blow it up then to the size you originally wanted, and it's an incredible program. So things are improving, making macro photography a lot easier for all of us, and that's a good thing. Okay, I went through a bunch of sites, did a lot of research, and I found some that I thought you'd really find useful. This is the list. Again, this is going to be in the recording, available as a PDF. And that's it. You can, that's my email address. I will send you a PDF of the presentation. And again, as I say, if you have any questions about, as you're working along and you run into something and you have, just email me. I'll be happily try to help you. So that's it. Any final questions? Hello? Anybody there? Boy, gee whiz, I'm talking to myself the whole time. Damn
Yeah, no one was listening.
We're all on mute.
What a dirty trick. Okay, any questions at all at this point?
Great presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. I
You're
really got
welcome.
something.
And I appreciate the ethics.
Yeah, I enjoy doing these things. So it's something I can do now, having so many years of experience. It's something I can give back, and I enjoy it. So I'm glad you enjoyed it. And as I say, I'll be back, I guess, right, Jeff? You invited me back in June?
Yeah, we were thinking of having you come back and do one of these critique sessions.
Yeah. These things have become the most popular part of our club activities. So I'll be very glad to do one for you. What I suggest is that you guys go out and take a lot of macro shots, see what you can do with the information that I've given you and you can get elsewhere. Take some macro shots, and then by June, when I come back and do one of these photo reviews, I'll be able to give you some really good suggestions right there. So, but of course, any photos you bring will be fine too. So, anyway,
Gerry,
yes.
have a question on when you showed those ants and the aphids, your award winner for that.
Mhm.
How do you get the ants to stay still?
Well, I just happened to walk past, this was in my garden when we still lived up in Vienna, Virginia. Walked past and saw them there. And ran in. I mean, the chances are by the time I was set up, it would have been a different story. They would have been gone. What these ants do is they stay there and they guard the aphids. They feed on basically the aphids poop. The aphids, as they suck the juices out of the plants, they give off a concentrated sweet liquid, and the ants feast on that. And they will stand around and wait for those. In fact, in that shot, one of the ants is actually drinking a drop of this. And they will stand there and just wait for the aphids to exude the stuff. So the ants aren't going anywhere. By the time I got back there, I had a lousy background, so I put a false background behind it. They still stayed there. I missed the shot of the century. That prize, I sent it to the Wildlife Photographer of the Year competition it was sponsored by BBC Wildlife magazine, and it's probably the biggest and most prestigious competition there is, international competition. And I sent it in there, and it won one of the categories, which was a big deal for me. I was like, I still haven't gotten over it, but I missed the shot that probably would have won the main categories based on what I heard back from people. One of the ants was one of the aphids had wandered off, and the ant had gone and grabbed it and brought it back into the little herd there so it could keep an eye on it. And as I was getting set up, the ant brought the aphid around the back and was holding it up. If I had gotten that shot, it would have been the most amazing thing. So, I'll die with that frustration, but but that's the way it is. That's photography. So I was happy I can't complain. It turned out well, but you very often miss the shot. So very often you have to work fast.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Do you use extension tubes with your 200 millimeter macro?
I have. I don't use extension tubes anymore because mine aren't automatic. I bought a set way back, and when my lenses weren't automatic even. But I don't use them that much because my macro gives me 1:1, and that's really, tell you the truth, that's almost as large as I ever want to go. And now that I have AI gigapixel, I can shoot it 1:1. And if I want it larger, I'll just blow it up. I wouldn't bother with them. It makes things a little more difficult. As I say, the higher the magnification, really making it challenging for yourself. Canon has a wonderful zoom macro lens. I forget the name of it. It goes up to 5x, 5:1 ratio. I don't know how you can even use it. I mean, the magnification would be so extreme, the depth of field so shallow, the movement so extreme. I don't know how you would use it, to tell you the truth, and get the shots you want. Use 1:1. I have a really nice close-up lens. I'll screw that on the front of my macro sometimes if I want a little more magnification. But no, I don't use my extension tubes much at all. I recommend them only if you don't want to invest in a macro lens. And I also don't recommend extenders. If you're shooting telephoto, an extender, a multiplier may be okay, but for macro, I wouldn't recommend it at all. They really degrade the quality of the image. And they're expensive too. They can cost almost as much as a good macro. So, and I would go for the off-brand. I have a Tamron. I've had it for 20 years. It's fantastic. If you want to pay a little extra, you can buy a Canon or Nikon, but they're not any sharper. They may be a little more robust, but unless you're a pro and beating up your lenses by using them every day in tough circumstances, I wouldn't. Both Sigma and Tamron make really, really fine macro lenses. And I think Sigma has a 180. If you want to go that route, if you're really going to be serious about shooting insects and needing working distance, then I would consider the Sigma 180. Fairly expensive, but you know, you only live once. That was the rationale when I bought my tripod. I didn't want to spend $700 for a tripod. That's ridiculous. But I did it, and it was one of the best things I ever did. So I've never regretted breaking the bank to buy a really good piece of equipment. Even if you have to wait a while, it's worth it. Anyway, you guys have a meeting to do, I guess.
Well, thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Yeah,
Thank
you're
you.
welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
That was
Look
great
forward, look
presentation.
forward to coming back. Okay.
Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jerry.
Okay. You're welcome.